The news reported spiking oil prices. Consumers have already seen higher gas prices at the pump. These are the visible results of a conflict thousands of miles away. Oil is the commodity that has driven the global economy for the last 50 years. However, this isn't a story just about rising energy cost. It's about the US government's high-risk bet that they can force change in Iran before the entire global system breaks down and things spiral out of control. The entire global economy runs on one key assumption: that oil keeps flowing across shipping lanes uninterrupted. Right now, that assumption is beginning to crack, and the negative impacts will be much worse than most people realize. To understand why, you have to understand what modern economies actually run on. It's the continuous flow of oil. The Persian Gulf produces over 30% of the world's crude oil. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Iran. All of it moves through one narrow channel, the Strait of Hormuz. This wasn't an accident, it was a trade-off. The system optimized for efficiency of transport, not resilience of supply. Oil tankers take the shortest route, and for 50 years, that route stayed open. The math is clear. In 2024, oil flow through the strait averaged 20 million barrels per day. That's 20% of global petroleum consumption. And here's the thing, 84% of that crude goes to Asian markets: China, India, Japan, South Korea. Europe depends on it too, importing 10% of its oil through the same corridor. The entire global manufacturing system, from German factories to Japanese refineries, assumes this small channel of water stays open. Alternative pipelines exist, but they're limited. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline can now move 5 million barrels per day. That sounds like a lot, but it's only 25% of Hormuz's capacity. The UAE's pipeline adds another 1.8 million, but here's the problem. Both are already partially used for daily operations. Saudi Arabia has been pumping more through its pipeline to avoid disruptions in the Red Sea. The UAE has been increasing its pipeline use as refinery upgrades allow more heavy crude to be processed locally. Basically, the system has no room for error. Think about the mechanics here. The strait is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Each shipping lane is just 2 miles wide in either direction. That's it. That's the entire bottleneck. And right now, that bottleneck is under threat. The world economy depends on a physical choke point that's been stable for decades. But stability isn't the same thing as safety. It's just a run of good luck. The trigger wasn't a full blockade. It was the risk of one. US-Iran tensions moved from diplomatic pressure to direct strikes. Within hours, Tehran issued explicit threats against ships in the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't hypothetical anymore. This is the moment the math started to shift. The Strait of Hormuz shipping lanes are narrow, smaller than most airports. It's a physical bottleneck you can disrupt with missiles, mines, or small boat attacks. Iran doesn't need a navy to close it. They need a handful of speedboats and the willingness to take the shot. Insurance markets understood this immediately. Rates on tankers traveling through the strait started climbing before the smoke cleared over Tehran. Think about that for a second. Oil traders don't wait for tankers to be attacked. They bid up prices the moment the probability of disruption ticked up. And that probability has moved from a background risk to a coin flip. Before any oil tankers were hit, oil prices spiked based purely on a shift in the probabilities. This is where the system's vulnerability becomes visible. For 50 years, the global economy operated on a single, unspoken assumption. Shipping through Hormuz is safe. That assumption was baked into every model, every budget, every long-term contract. It meant insurance was cheap. It meant refineries kept minimal inventory. It meant supply chains ran on just-in-time delivery because the tap was never supposed to turn off. Now that assumption has changed. The system hasn't collapsed yet, but the math that kept it stable, cheap insurance, thin inventories, predictable pricing, has already broken. Oil traders are pricing in war risk. Shipping companies are rerouting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 15 days and $2 million per tanker in extra cost. Asian refineries are panic buying spot cargoes, pushing premiums to 3-year highs. The assumption that held the system together was never tested by a real sustained threat to Hormuz. The 1980s tanker war came close. The 2019 attacks on Saudi facilities came closer. But each time, the threat receded before the system had to face its own fragility. This time is different. The threat isn't receding, it's escalating, and the system is running out of room to absorb the risk. The threat to Hormuz doesn't stay in the Gulf. It moves through the global economy in a linear chain reaction that most people never see coming. Energy shocks don't stay in energy markets. They transmit, they amplify, and they show up in places you wouldn't expect. First, oil prices spike. Bloomberg Economics estimates that a 1% drop in global supply pushes prices up 4%. That's the baseline. A full closure of Hormuz for even a few months would cut 20 million barrels per day from the market. The math is brutal. That takes oil to well over $100 per barrel. And that's the optimistic scenario. If panic buying kicks in, if Asian refiners start hoarding, if speculators pile on, the price could overshoot to $150 or higher. We've seen this before. In 2008, oil hit $147 a barrel after a series of smaller disruptions. The difference now is the scale. Hormuz isn't a single field going offline, it's the spigot for the entire Persian Gulf. Second, those oil prices feed directly into transportation cost. Diesel for trucks, jet fuel for planes, bunker fuel for cargo ships. Every product that moves, food from California to New York, clothing from Vietnam to Europe, electronics from China to everywhere, gets more expensive. Think about the mechanics here. A container ship crossing the Pacific burns 150 tons of fuel per day. At $60 per barrel, that's $20,000 a day in fuel. At $108 per barrel, it's $36,000. That cost doesn't stay with the shipping company. It gets passed down the chain, embedded in the price of everything you buy. A pair of sneakers that cost $80 last month costs $90 next month. A head of lettuce that was $2 is now $2.50. The inflation isn't abstract, it's in your shopping cart. Third, that cost-push inflation spreads through the entire economy. The IMF calculates that a 10% sustained increase in energy prices pushes global inflation up by 0.4 percentage points. But that's a smooth, gradual increase from a diversified supply base. This isn't smooth. This is a shock to the most fundamental input in modern production. When oil spikes over 50%, inflation doesn't tick up modestly, it surges. Services inflation follows, because workers facing higher commuting costs demand higher wages. Manufacturing inflation accelerates because plastics, chemicals, and synthetic materials all come from oil. The ECB's vice president has already warned that Eurozone inflation will rise if the conflict persists. He's not guessing. The models are clear. An oil shock of this magnitude adds 2 to 3 percentage points to headline inflation within 6 months. That wipes out a year of progress in the fight against rising prices. Fourth, central banks react. They have one tool to combat inflation: interest rates. Facing sticky, supply-driven price increases, they raise rates to crush demand. The logic is simple. If energy is more expensive, everything else has to get cheaper to compensate. The only way to achieve that is to make borrowing more expensive, slow investment, and push unemployment higher. The 1970s provide the blueprint. After the 1973 oil embargo, central banks initially hesitated, treating the shock as temporary. When inflation kept rising, they had to hike aggressively. The Fed raised rates to 20% by 1981. The result was deep, painful recession. We've seen this movie before. The script hasn't changed. The only question is whether today's central banks, facing the same supply shock, will make the same mistakes. Early signs suggest they might. The Bank of England has already signaled it's prepared to hold rates higher for longer. The Federal Reserve, despite political pressure, knows it can't ignore inflation. And even if the central banks don't raise interest rates, a delay in lowering interest rates against market expectations can be just as devastating. Fifth, economic growth slows. Oxford Economics projects that UK and Eurozone growth will drop by 0.2% this year if the conflict persists. That sounds small. It isn't. In the UK, that takes growth from 1.1% to 0.9%. In the Eurozone, it pushes an already fragile 1.2% recovery below 1%. At the margin, that's the difference between job creation and job destruction. Manufacturing slows first. German car plants, dependent on just-in-time parts from Asia, face delays and higher costs. Japanese electronics factories can't get the components they need. Chinese export manufacturers see orders dry up as Western consumers pull back spending. The slowdown feeds on itself. Lower growth means lower tax revenues, which means governments have less room to cushion the blow with stimulus. Sixth, the real economy cracks. Job markets contract as manufacturing slows and consumer spending dries up. Housing markets face the delayed impact of higher interest rates. Mortgage rates in the UK have already started rising in anticipation of central bank action. A family that could afford a $300,000 house at 3% interest can't afford it at 6%. Prices stall, then fall. Construction stops. The ripple effects spread. Fewer building permits, fewer construction jobs, less demand for lumber, cement, appliances. This is the transmission mechanism. A physical disruption in a 21-mile corridor becomes a financial crisis in Frankfurt, a recession in London, and layoffs in Los Angeles. Again, the 1970s showed us a real live example. Supply disruption caused double-digit inflation and required brutal rate hikes that triggered recessions. The world economy is more interconnected now, not less. The system is more efficient, which means it's more difficult to absorb shocks. Let's dig in more specifically on who gets hurt. Europe gets hit first. 10% of its oil imports flow through Hormuz. The Eurozone recovery was already fragile at 1.2% growth. This pushes it below 1%. That's not a slowdown, it's a stall. Germany's manufacturing base, dependent on Asian parts and Middle East energy, faces a cost squeeze it can't pass on. The ECB's vice president has warned inflation will rise. Asia faces a different problem: scale. China imports 10 million barrels per day through Hormuz. Any disruption hits its manufacturing base directly. India's economy runs on imported energy. Price spikes blow out its trade deficit and weaken the rupee. Japan and South Korea have strategic reserves, but those are designed for short-term disruptions, not a sustained conflict. Their refineries operate on just-in-time delivery. When the tap slows, production stops. Emerging markets get hit twice. Higher oil prices raise import costs. A stronger US dollar, as capital flees to safety, makes those imports even more expensive in local currency. Their currencies collapse. Their central banks face an impossible choice: raise rates to defend the currency, crushing growth, or let inflation run. There is no good option. Housing markets face the delayed impact. Higher interest rates mean fewer mortgages, prices stall, construction stops. Job losses follow as manufacturing slows and consumer spending contracts. The system was global, the consequences are global. There is no decoupling. Some analysts argue the world can in fact absorb a long Hormuz disruption. They point to 3 safety valves. First, strategic reserves sound impressive. The US holds 700 million barrels, but here's the math. At 20 million barrels per day through Hormuz, those reserves last 35 days. They were designed for short-term disruptions, not a sustained naval conflict lasting months. Second, US shale production gets cited as America's shield. It covers 60% of consumption. However, shale wells decline fast and new drilling takes months, not weeks. Even if US production ramped up, it can't replace the 20% of global supply that moves through Hormuz. Lastly, diversified energy sources. Renewables, natural gas, coal have grown, but oil still powers 95% of global shipping and 90% of air travel. The world hasn't transitioned away from oil. It's added complexity on top of it. The real choke point isn't just the physical strait. It's the assumption that shipping itself is safe. Every alternative route still depends on maritime choke points: the Suez Canal, the Malacca Strait, the Panama Canal. The system wasn't built for resilience. It was built for transport efficiency. When that efficiency disappears, there is no backup plan. To learn about a country that is pushing hard to move the global economy away from oil to alternative energy sources, click on the video on the screen.